Hi, this is Indie Wine Podcast, episode 11. My name is Matt Wood, and today we'll be discussing the proposed new AVA of Contra Costa. This would add a section of Contra Costa County to the Central Coast AVA. Some of you might be familiar with the wines and grapes from the region already, especially the sandy soils of Antioch and Oakley. We're going to take sort of a nickel tour of the area and its history, and then hear a little bit more from Patrick L. Shabram and Becky Bloomfield. Patrick, who is a geographer specializing in viticulture, conducted the geographic study of the area. He's previously worked on petitions for areas such as West Sonoma, Moon Mountain, Fort Ross Seaview, Russian River, and more. 13 in all, I believe. Becky Bloomfield is the president of the Contra Costa Wine Growers and owner of Bloomfield Vineyards in Brentwood. She's been instrumental in gathering growers and wineries in the area for support for a number of years, both formally and informally. Her family's been farming this land for generations, since the 1940s. Here we go. There's a new AVA being proposed for California, the Contra Costa AVA. This proposal would add on to the Central Coast AVA. The sound you're hearing is the wind of coastal Contra Costa County. We're standing on a pier alongside the San Joaquin River, about a baseball throw away from one of the more well-known vineyards in the area. From here, you can see the expanse of the San Joaquin River, the toll bridge that crosses it, windmills, power plants, ducks, tules, and an occasional jumping fish. The wind comes in from the Pacific Ocean through the break in the coast range of mountains created by the San Francisco Bay. It passes the Golden Gate Bridge and continues through San Pablo Bay, the narrow Carquinez Strait, and into Sassoon Bay and the San Joaquin River, where many of the vineyards lie along. This wind continues on to the Clarksburg and Lodi wine growing regions, where it provides the maritime influence for them. Wind, water, and Mount Diablo make many of the defining features of growing wine grapes in this area. The winds sweep through in the morning and afternoon every day, helping to moderate some of the heat. This area can get hot, and even though everything is green right now after record rains, it'll be brown in a couple months. California vineyards rarely receive rain during the growing season. Many of the vineyards that aren't in view of these bay waters lie interwoven with the California Delta as you get further east. This watershed collects about half the fresh water in the state through the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers. It's the largest estuary on the west coast of the Americas. It carries water for Central and Southern Californians to drink, and is a major source of irrigation water for California food crops. Around the city of Brentwood, much of the vineyard land is at sea level and protected from the delta waters by levees. Sometimes these levees will break, and then you have more delta. Even though Mount Diablo itself would be just out of the Contra Costa AVA boundary, its foothills surround and influence much of it. These foothills roll down towards the coast. Mount Diablo at almost 4,000 feet, and the coast range to the west of it cast a rain shadow over much of the proposed AVA. Parts of it get about half the rainfall of the La Miranda AVA, which is also in Contra Costa County, but on the immediate east side of the coast range from Oakland. Moving from the west, some of the cities covered in this new proposed AVA are Martinez, Concord, Bay Point, Pittsburgh, Antioch, Oakley, Brentwood, Knightson, and Byron. If you're making the drive, you'll start near Viano and Martinez, a couple miles from the bay. Small town where John Muir lived for a time, and maybe the martini was invented there also. As you drive east, you'll start through a small pass filled with windmills, going past Port Chicago, which might be best well known for a large accidental munitions explosion during World War II. And soon you'll be in Bay Point, Pittsburgh, Antioch, and Oakley, all nestled between the foothills and the water. The latter two are well known for their sand when it comes to vineyards, and many of these vineyards are now nestled between neighborhoods and light industry. As you head a little more inland to the agricultural areas of Brentwood, Knightson, and Byron, it feels like real farmland, flatter, longer stretches between cross streets, lots of corn, lots of grapes, lots of cherries, and the delta winding its way through and intersecting. This part of the delta is very popular for water skiing and fishing. So you see lots of trailered boats around. You see lots of families out during the summer for the U-pick season in Brentwood also. Native American tribes have called this area home for around 10,000 years, Like many traditional tribal people, the Bay Miwok lived in harmony with the land that they were caretakers of. They tended to the land to ensure that basket materials, roots, and medicinal plants were plentiful through the use of traditional ecological knowledge. They were artisans with great skills in basket making, carving, and creating elaborate dance regalia. They were proficient tule boat makers, voyagers in the bay, and fishermen. They were especially known for their weaving. Living near the water offered many tules for weaving into baskets, mats, huts, and boats. Every autumn, families and tribes from the interconnected villages would gather at the sacred Mount Diablo, which is called Tuyashtak by the local tribes for ceremonies, harvests of acorns, and trade. In the area of the proposed AVA, tribes include the Chubkan, who lived along Sassoon Bay. Their villages are said to be amongst the largest in this area of California. They first encountered Spanish expeditions in 1772 and again in 1776. The Carquin tribe lived on both sides of the Carquinez Strait, to which they gave their name. Further east were the Yulpun, where Antioch, Oakley, and Brentwood now sit. Like many of the tribes in this area, for the most part they moved rather than became part of the California mission system as long as possible. The Delta offered a refuge, which made it difficult for Spanish troops to locate them. Franciscans reached this area around 1794, forcing migration to Mission San Francisco de Assisi and Mission San Jose. The Yulpun held out until about 1810. During the Spanish Rancho era, there were not one, but two Spanish land grants named after the sand dunes that dominate the area. Rancho Los Medanos covering Pittsburgh and parts of Antioch, and Rancho Los Maganos covering the rest of Antioch, along with Oakley, Brentwood, and Knightson. In 1837, John Marsh became the first non-Hispanic white settler in the area when he purchased this ranch. Marsh's letters and writings helped to spawn the Bear Flag Revolt in Sonoma, which eventually led to California being occupied by the US government. There's lots of things named after Marsh in this area. As a kid, I always assumed it was for the wetlands, but it's for the man. John Marsh was murdered by disgruntled employees near Martinez in 1856. Over time, the ranchos were divided up and sold or squatted on as unsuccessful gold seekers, and immigrants from China, Portugal, Italy, and more moved into the area. Some to help on railroads or levees, some probably to plant vines. With statehood, Contra Costa, which means opposite coast in Spanish, opposite from San Francisco that is, became one of the original 27 counties. Today, the region is part of the San Francisco Bay Area, the eastern portion of Contra Costa County being one of the borders. The first grapes in the proposed AVA were planted near Brentwood in 1846. Oakley and Martinez followed after. By 1916, there were approximately 6,000 acres of grapes in the county. When the Viano family purchased their land in the Vine Hill area of Martinez in 1920, the vineyard was already 30 plus years old. Some of the original vines still remain. They grow Chardonnay, Chenin Blanc, French Colombard, Muscat, Canelli, Cabernet Sauvignon, Valdegui, Petit Syrah, Sangiovese, and Zinfandel on these hillside vineyards. Moving east, you have the sands of Antioch and Oakley, with vineyards planted to a mix of Zinfandel, Mataro, Carignan, and Petit Syrah, sometimes in blocks dominated by a varietal and sometimes more randomly interplanted. Many of these grapes are grown in the Delhi blow sand that characterize this area. These vines can have roots going 40 feet deep into this well-drained sand. It really is like walking on a beach, and your car can get stuck too. Rooting these vines is possible because phylloxera is unable to thrive in these sandy soils. You'll also find some on the older St. George rootstock. Most of these vineyards are over 100 years old. Evangelo, Sandy Lane, Planchon, Duarte, Pato, Maury, Mazzoni, Big Break, and Del Barba are names many might be familiar with. Moving east, we enter the Brentwood, Byron, and Knightson area with many plantings from around the 1990s, including Bloomfield, Hannah Nicole, Avena, Tamayo, Peterson, and Campos. You're much more likely to see these vines on a trellis system, and the homes situated in these vineyards tend to be nicer too. Grown in these areas are whites such as Verdelho, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Pinot Gris, and Viognier, to reds like Zinfandel, Mataro, Syrah, Cabernet, and Tinto Cal. Smaller artisanal wineries as well as larger production wineries source grapes from some of these areas. Some names to look out for: Bedrock, Extra Dimensional, Nyers, Once and Future, Ridge, Lusu, Everwild, Gearhead, Bloomfield, GPA, Bird Horse, Ergolet Brothers, Desire Lines, Hannah Nicole, Precedent, Coat West. There's many more still. As you move up in size, you can find Mondavi, Kenwood, Bogle, and of course Klein sourcing grapes from here. Klein has extensive vineyards and history in this area, and the Big Break Vineyard is the vineyard near where we were standing at the beginning of this episode. This proximity to water can lower some of the frost pressure in this area, and combined with the heat can make for early bud break and early harvest. Urban expansion can be one of the bigger challenges in this area to vineyards. Many of the vineyards in Oakley are surrounded by homes and subdivisions, and many streets and neighborhoods are named with what was there before, or with wine-related names while removing vineyards. Vintage Parkway, Gamay Drive. An old vine Carignan vineyard that I took fruit from as a home winemaker as recently as 2019 is now a blank piece of land awaiting redevelopment. You can look at the Google Earth of it and see the excavators still. Many of the families are 4th or 5th generation in the area and find themselves with land worth a lot of money as the Bay Area pushes further out. And with falling grape prices, it's hard to blame them for feeling like redevelopment is the best option. The Historic Vineyard Society is trying to slow these losses in all of the old vine vineyards in California, and they currently have 7 from Contra Costa in their registry. If this partition for AVA status goes through, it can mean a higher price per ton for growers, hopefully keeping some of these old vineyards in the ground and allowing the newer plantings to flourish and become old themselves. After all, the only way I found myself harvesting grapes from the 100-plus-year-old Carignan vineyard is because a commercial winery wasn't taking it that year. Contra Costa Wine Growers has been around since 2011. It was founded by a group of growers who had been meeting informally for years before that, and in their own words, the Contra Costa Wine Growers Association was founded to promote grape growing and wine production throughout the county, firmly establishing Contra Costa County as a premium wine growing region. There are approximately 1,700 acres of vines currently. Here's Patrick to tell us more.
I would say the biggest delineator of the area has to do with climate. So as you move inland, the temperatures generally get warmer. So we've got this idea between the coastal areas with generally cooler climates and the inland areas that have generally warmer climates. But in this particular case, it's an inland location, but you get that airflow through the Carquinez Strait. So you get some of that airflow off of Sassoon Bay. Sometimes you can even see the fog bank sort of out in Sassoon Bay. And that airflow has the net effect of sort of cooling the region down a little bit. So what you end up with is an area that overall is generally cooler than some of your warmer inland valley locations. So into the San Joaquin Valley, for example. So it's kind of a transitional climate between the cooler coastal climates and the warmer inland climates. So a lot of it is just about that airflow that goes through the area. There are a few other things. I mean, it's not as mountainous as some of the terrain that you would get sort of to the west, sort of in between, sort of in western Contra Costa County, or at Mount Diablo to the south of the area. And you generally don't get as flat as terrain as you're going to find if you go further out into San Joaquin Valley. Although, out on the Delta where Brentwood and Oakley are, it is relatively flat. But I would say that climate overall is the biggest distinguishing characteristic for the region. Coastal influences in an inland location. I did find some distinction in soils, but a variety of soils that are, in general, most of the soils are of a sedimentary parent material. I don't know that the soils, though, offer the greatest distinction in this particular area, just because of the fact that you do have this diversity within the soils. That being said, I will have to say that parts of the Contra Costa AVA are very much associated with particular soils. So there's the Delhi soils that exist around Oakley. So there are these deep sandy soils that are extremely well drained, really sort of suppress the growth in the rootstock. There are some other sort of expanding in what we call vertisol soils, or these expanding, contracting soils that you find in around Brentwood. that are actually used a lot in things like orchards. Um, so they have the net effect of sort of putting a little bit of stress on the vine, not so much stress on the vine that crops can't be produced, but in general, by putting that little bit of stress on the vine, what you're doing is you're essentially ensuring greater complexity in the grapes as the plant puts more of its energy into reproduction than into vigorous growth. With Contra Costa in particular, I think what people might not fully appreciate is how well known a wine region it was before Prohibition. It was a destination for wine, especially central Contra Costa County, so around Walnut Creek, Martinez, Concord, those areas. Today, eastern Contra Costa is kind of a destination for people that are interested in the U-pick fruits that you can get out there. So there is an agricultural tourism that exists there. You've had enough urbanization within central Contra Costa County that it's hard to have as many acres dedicated to vines in that part as you do in the eastern part. But there are plenty of very old vines that you find around Martinez, around Oakley, and parts of Brentwood, Antioch. So you do find these old vines that managed to survive through Prohibition and continue to produce these wines today. And Contra Costa County is interesting in that it really already has a style sort of associated with it. So you could actually look up reviews of Contra Costa County. And that's interesting in that it's a county-wide designation, but most people are referring to sort of central and eastern county when they do it. So it's well primed based on that reputation to be recognized as a unique viticultural area.
Here's my interview with Becky, talking through some of the finer details of the proposed AVA and this area in general.
My understanding that pre-Prohibition, there were a lot of grape growers out here. And then Prohibition happened, and a lot of them just decided to turn their ground into, growing other crops that could actually make money, obviously. So, but we have vineyards in Contra Costa County that are over 100 years old. There's a very famous vineyard called Evangelo Vineyards and Viano in Martinez. And then obviously old Zan and Movedra and Carignan vineyards in Oakley. They are probably approximately 100 years old.
This area of Contra Costa, it didn't get included in the Central Coast AVA. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's kind of a head scratcher because everything on the other side of Mount Diablo was included. And for whatever reason, either we weren't, aware of when the lines were being drawn way back when, or it just wasn't in the radar. So that's been the situation.
How did you come to be president of the Contra Costa wine growers?
Well, we've been growing grapes since 1995, and a group of us have been meeting since the 90s in regards to this region and getting our grapes known to, other large, wine grape growing regions. And, we were growing 350 acres at one time. And the point is that we knew we were growing quality grapes and we wanted to get a fair market price for our grapes.
Did it start as kind of a looser group, and then at some point you kind of solidified it and made it official?
Correct. We became a nonprofit officially in 2011. And I have been a part of this group since its conception.
What was the impetus to start looking at trying to make the Contra Costa AVA now?
Well, there's a lot of people coming in and putting in grapes. Our county has loosened up the restrictions on putting these kinds of facilities in county property. And so we have a new winery here recently, and we're hoping that we'll get more. We really want to make this a destination and ag tourism on the wine side of it. I mean, we're huge ag tourism as far as our stone fruit, our cherries and peaches. We welcome about 200,000 people in the months of May and June for a U-pick season.
Hmm.
So we're just trying to grab a little bit of that. And, we want to encourage farmers to continue doing what they're doing and put in new vineyards and new wineries.
What are some of the kind of defining features of the proposed AVA as far as climate and soil, and what kind of ties it all together?
So they compare us obviously to Central Coast climate, and it is basically all science. It's waterfall, it's water, what you get for rain, fog, chill factor, highs and lows in weather, how many days of sunlight versus fog. And all those match up perfectly with the bay. So we are on the Delta, we get fog right on the hills outside of our town, the Mount Diablo Range and the coastal range, and our climate is perfect for growing grapes, and we mimic everything that Central Coast is.
And you get that, like, all that influence of Sassoon Bay and
Correct.
Carquinez Strait, San Joaquin River,
Correct.
all of that, right? Kind of
Yes.
the wind coming in from
Yep.
the bay and everything.
Yes, we do, and we have the Delta. Of course, we're surrounded by the Delta, as you know. So same thing. Nights cool down, days heat up, and it's perfect for growing grapes.
Are there any grapes that you propose the region concentrate on, or is there something you feel grows especially well in the area?
Well, our property is basically at sea level. So we grow, our soil is clay where we grow here in Brentwood. So in the Byron area. So we grow Chardonnay, we grow Sauvignon Blanc, we grow Pinot Grigio. At one time we grew Syrah and Merlot. And we were very well known for our Viognier grapes. We had 15 acres of Viognier. So those varieties grow especially well here. As far as, trellis vineyard on quad or vertical. The grapes grow especially well in Oakley that are just sitting in the sand. They're non-trellised, and those are your Zins and your Movedras and your Carignans and Petite Syrah. We have some hillside area here, and we have a family called the Nunn family who has put in roughly 500 acres of various grapes, and they do have some cab that they do quite well, and it is on hillside. So obviously Cabernet would be, best growing on a hillside, rocky soil, that type of climate. So I'm not really sure if there's any specific. I just know what we grow and what we grow well. But I think we're very diverse as far as the wine growing. As far as a grape varietal, I think that we could probably grow just about anything here.
How many growers do you have in the area approximately?
In our certain area that we're trying to get into to create the AVA?
I guess kind of in the, how many growers you have in sort of the proposed Contra Costa AVA?
Well, we have growers outside of Oakley. I mean, we have a lot of people that are growing grapes that are not necessarily a part of our organization for one reason or another. I mean, we have some old families that just, don't really want to participate in something like this, but they're going to benefit from it. And we're okay with that, as we're not going to beat a dead horse. But I would say we probably have, in this side that we're trying to get into the AVA, over 20 growers.
Has the response from most growers been positive? I imagine you could get probably more money per ton for grapes for most of the farmers, I would think.
That's exactly one of the main reasons that we're doing this. And the industry has really hurt the smaller guys. And we're not really small. We're just not, Sonoma or Napa or whatever. We're not small at all. I mean, we have 2,500 acres of vines over here. We're not small. But to get recognized as, quality grapes, we've got to get out there. And, we grow for a lot of big guys, my husband and my family. But the big guys crush you and they don't pay you, what you should be getting paid for your grapes. So that's going to change.
Yeah, good.
And when we first started, we got good money. We were in contract with Kendall Jackson and Mondavi, and we would get like $1,100, $1,400 a ton for our Chard, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Gris. And then just over the last few, maybe say 10, 15 years, it's really gone down considerably.
Do you feel like that's them sourcing grapes from just other regions or changes in the wine industry as a whole? And
No, No, they're still purchasing our grapes. They're just not, the contracts are light. And
Okay.
for us, I mean, I'm speaking on behalf of us, and there's a few of us that grow for, production. And then I pick a few tons to make my wine.
Right.
A lot of the wineries, or the few wineries that we have here, I mean, they're producing everything that they're growing into wine. So it's a little bit different, but yet again, to be included in the Central Coast AVA through the Contra Costa AVA, I mean, I think that we're just going to be put on the map, and the tourism will go up, and more people will be encouraged to put more wineries here.
Do you think most of the wineries will start labeling with the new AVA?
Well, right now we're at political AVAs, so everything on my label says Contra Costa County.
Right.
But
Yeah.
where we would say Contra Costa, I don't know. I just think that maybe as a point of selling grapes, or maybe on the back label, you would say, Central Coast Appellation. I think it's up to them how they're going to do that. I would assume that some of them would change that.
It seems like you have a lot of interest in that area from wineries outside of the region, whether it's production wineries or smaller sort of artisanal labels or medium-sized labels. Have you seen that fluctuate quite a bit over the years? I feel like it kind of rises and falls, at least from my vantage point.
I think for
Maybe.
sure. I think especially like before the recession, in 2008, we sold grapes to Point Reyes. We sold grapes to, there was some guys over your way called 3 Mile. We sold a lot of grapes. We sold grapes to Temecula, to Callaway Cellars, so small and large. And it seems like after the recession, things definitely changed.
Okay.
For whatever reason. I mean, that's a point of reference in time for me. I can't really specifically say why.
And how would you describe some of the climate for someone that's never been there? Climate, maybe some of the soils of that region for somebody that's never been to the Contra Costa area or isn't familiar with it.
Well, we're considered having the best soil in California. I mean, we're a class 1 soil, which means it's the best for growing most everything. All the ingredients are perfect. It's, perfect balance of nitrogen and everything that makes things grow. So Oakley is famous for their sand. One of the reasons why Oakley's grapes survived all the diseases that wiped up Napa in the 70s is because sand is a natural filtration system. So diseases, whether it became airborne or something that would sick the vines, they were able to get rid of that disease by just the filtration system. So it's pretty incredible. In Brentwood specifically, we're famous for our tree fruit and our corn and tomatoes. And I mean, we can grow anything here. But the grapes was something that we sparked interest in the 90s. We were one of the first new vineyards in the area. And then we were, hand in hand with putting in the Tamayo vineyard, also Hannah Nicole Vineyards, which is a winery. And then we did a lot of installation for our vineyards out in the Oakley area as well.
Having the new AVA, do you think it will help any of the sort of urban encroachment kind of? I feel like especially some of the older vineyards have already been developed into houses in Oakley area. Do you see the AVA helping that? I guess, is there anything to do to save some of those older vineyards that are at risk in Oakley and surrounding areas?
What the problem is there is that these families are multiple generations, and the younger generation just doesn't want to deal with it. Or that they don't have any interest in farming a small piece, surrounded by houses. They get a lot of grief from the residents there. I've heard many stories, and there's recently a very famous vineyard that just, basically they plowed over because there was no interest for the next generation to take care of it. And, spraying and all these things that you've got to do to maintain a vineyard. You got to do it at night and the noise. And it's really very sad, I'd have to say. But that's just signs of the times, especially in Oakley. I mean, that is a very large urban, sprawl right now.
Yeah.
So trying to keep those, it's really up to the families. I mean, nobody's forcing them to sell. It's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, that land is worth a lot of money that the grapes are sitting on.
Correct.
In lots of cases. So.
Yes. And that's been, also since the recession, the housing boom in Oakley came up hard and fast.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. So, I mean, there's still quite a few vines out there, but they are very small lots, under 10 acres.
Yeah, most of them are kind of about a block of real estate.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean,
kind of divvied up by the roads.
yeah, I mean, you drive down, Empire, and then there they are. It's like they're right on the road. It's pretty glorious, actually. It's super cool. I mean, those vines are gnarly, and they're very they've got a lot of history. Just to kind of explain a little bit about this county, they put a moratorium on ag property in most of the area outside the city limits of Brentwood, that you cannot sell it for development. A lot of easements were bought in the 2000s to prevent that kind of thing happening. So basically, the easements were bought, that the property owners were paid, and that means that in perpetuity, that property has to stay in ag or be nothing, but it cannot be developed by houses.
Oh, really? So that's a county regulation?
It's a county regulation, yeah. And so we had when Brentwood started exploding with property being sold for development, the ag community said, hey, listen, you just took 3,000 acres of ag property, and we need to do something. We need to get something back for that. I mean, you allowed it to be developed, so what are we going to get for it? So we have a ag enterprise fund. What happens is a developer comes in, they pay us I think it's $600 a house, and that goes into an ag fund. That ag fund grew so much that we developed a land trust called Brentwood Ag Land Trust, and that land trust was pivotal in organizing the purchasing of easements to prevent that happening again.
Okay.
So we spent like $12 million going and buying easements on people's property and offering them money. You get money for it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it can be right off of Balfour Road. Some of it was some of the Nunn property, but also Hannah Nicole. So vineyards. So that just, solidified the fact that ag property is there forever, and that cannot ever change, ever. So if you look into land trust organizations, that's what they do.
Do you anticipate the AVA being approved?
I do. I don't think there's any reason that it wouldn't be. I mean, if you are judging this on complete science, there shouldn't be any, controversy whatsoever. We're in open comment right now, as you know. We're halfway through it, and so far there has not been anything in opposing it. So no comments whatsoever. So if they have another 30 days, though. So, I can't imagine anybody would really have a hardship for this happening. So we'll see. Is that it? Especially when right over the hill, I mean, as the crow flies, 12 miles, it's Central Coast. It makes no sense.
Is there a website or anything people can go to put in a good word for approval of the AVA?
Well, the federal government would really just prefer that they have about 10 comments. So right now, myself and a couple other growers are in the process of making those comments. And then, of course, they would like, local officials like the local mayors and supervisors and such like that to put in a comment. I'm not really sure. According to the guy who's helping us with this, our consultant, the TTB would just like to hear about 8 to 10 really good, solid comments, and that's it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They just don't want to. They don't want to be overrun with, a bunch, is what I've been told. So I'm just following the rules.
Can you give me a little bit of info about your vineyard and the wines that you make?
Sure. So our family's been farming here in Brentwood since 1940. So we have been growing various crops since then.
Oh,
our home ranch is 635 acres. And when my husband and I moved our family from the valley back up here to take over the family ranch when his dad retired, we decided to look into putting vineyards in. So we put in our first 50 acres in 1995. And then we put in another 80 acres shortly after that, and then another couple hundred. So at one time, we were growing 350 acres of grapes, which is a lot. Our soil is, like I said, class 1 soil here. So our grapes could produce 14 tons an acre.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, a lot, but great quality. Just because we grew a lot doesn't mean that the quality was not there. We started out growing grapes for Kendall Jackson, like I said, in Mondavi. And we had those contracts for about 8 years. And then things just kind of slowed down as far as that goes. That industry has gluts, and then they have shortages, and then they have gluts, and then they have shortages. So when we were putting those grapes in, things were really high. The market was super high, and things change in agriculture. So I've been producing Chardonnay, Viognier, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Gris since 2004. And then I have been sourcing my reds from Livermore since 2005.
Do you have a tasting room in Brentwood?
I do.
Right? Okay.
It's called Cocoa County Wine Company. And I carry a lot of local wines, including my own, and just California wines, except for our sparklings we import. But everything else is, I'm a California wine grower, and I'm going to promote California wines.
And that's Bloomfield Wines?
Bloomfield Vineyards, yep. I have a website, and also Contra Costa has a website too. Contra Costa is ccwinegrowers.com. So C is in Contra, CC is in Contra Costa. So ccwinegrowers.com. Bloomfield is bloomfieldvineyards.com. I think for what people should know is that this is a great place to visit. There's a lot going on in this area as far as wine production and grapes and things like that. I mean, we are very proud. We won a lot of awards for our wine. We enter all the California competitions. We are a fierce competitor in that way. We're being judged amongst our people that are in this business, winemakers and such. And we're really proud of what we're doing. And that's why we're, seeking this AVA out, is just to, let the rest of the California know.
Here's a late-breaking interview with Michael Parker, CalWinebroker.com. Michael sells to a lot of small wineries and home winemakers in the Contra Costa area, and is familiar with lots of the grape growers, especially the older families that live in the area. The sound quality on this interview isn't quite up to the usual level, but I think there's a lot of good information in it, and I think you'll enjoy it. Here you go. You work with a lot of the growers out there getting grapes for home winemakers and small wineries, and any facts or historical info or what it's like present day, anything that people might be interested in.
It's a region that's been planted for a long time. A lot of the grapes out there were planted in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it's mostly head prune. So that means there's no trellises. They're just plants that go up. They're usually on a stake, but they're not on a trellis. Get great big fat tree trunk size roots on them, and they produce wonderful fruit. They're down to the water level. The river was wild. Oakley was the river bottom. The river was spread out, of course, over more territory than it is now. So as being the river bottom, it was all sand. Terrain out there is all sand, and the grapes like growing in sand because the sand doesn't hold the water. They like the water, but they don't want it collecting underground, because when it collects underground, it causes root rot, causes phylloxera, which destroys the roots. And so when the sand lets the water just flow through, that's much better for the grapes. That's why the grapes are very old over there. There's a lot of grapes over there that are at or more than 100 years old. That's why the roots can go down through the sand and go down to permanent water. And some of those roots are 30, 35 feet deep down there tapped into permanent water. And they just sit there and grow. So it's a very good environment. The terrain, the cool air coming down the river cools it off at night, and you have the hot days. And that's what grapes like. They like hot days and cool nights. So and water, permanent water. That combination is all there.
How would you describe the as you move further east into like that Brentwood area? How would you describe the grape growing in that area?
It's very different. You get a lot of clay over in the Brentwood area, and the clay holds there's a higher water level. Water level in Brentwood is as low as about 7 or 8 feet deep. And normally you would think that was a good thing. It's not necessarily good when there's clay down there and that clay is holding the water. That means the roots can get down in it and get water, but they can also rot down there and it can kill the plant. Typical life cycle of a grape plant is about 35 or 40 years, and then they need to be replaced. But if they're in the sand in Oakley, then they can last a lot longer than that. Also, if you take a bird's eye view of the river and the whole Bay Area, see that the wind comes down through the Cartina Strait and it blows straight into the Lodi region. And that's why Lodi is a good growing area. It's because it gets the wind coming off of the river. The wind blows inland, it comes down that river channel and blows right into Lodi. Best growing region. If you go a few miles north of Lodi or a few miles south, you don't get near as much cooling off in the evening as you do in Lodi. Same thing's true with Oakley and Brentwood. Brentwood is a few miles south of Oakley.
How have you seen the viticulture or the vineyards or the growers change in that area since you've been working out there?
Well, there's been very little change over there. They've got it good, and they don't. They just let those grapes grow. They do minimal. What I've seen is that they do minimal maintenance as far as keeping the plants going. They'll go in and trim them up a little bit, but not very much. There's no. When you don't have trellises, you don't have any maintenance because there's nothing to maintain. When you have when the grapes are on trellis, then you have to keep them on the trellis, and you have to go in and prune them so that they stay on the trellis. But when there's no trellis, the grape just grows like a bush, and it's like a wild bush, and there's not a lot that you have to do to it. So you might thin it out just a little bit, but a lot less maintenance. And so the growers over there, of course, like that, because the less maintenance means more money for them, and they're certainly in favor of that. And also, when the grapes are down, when they're down to have their own water, when they're down into the permanent water, you don't have to go out there and water them. So between no water and very little maintenance on the plant itself, that makes an ideal growing circumstances for the grower.
What's your feeling about, some of the vineyards have been sold off for redevelopment over the last, decade or so? A lot of older families in the area with lots of acres. You see that slowing down at all?
Unfortunately, I don't see it slowing down. I think it's every year we lose a number of acres of those old grapevines to developers. What happens? You start out with a family. A farmer came out there years ago and bought the property, probably had grapes on it when they bought it. And for some of the families who go clear back to the original plantings in the 1800s, early 1900s. But the point is that they grow up and they have kids, and the kids grow up and have kids, and you get 2 or 3 generations, and you wind up with a number of people who have no interest in the grapevines or the grape business themselves. All they see is the money that comes from the developer coming in and buying the property and developing it. So they get a little greedy and, 2 or 3 generations away from the original people who purchased the property. Now there's 20 or 30 people who have a vested interest in that property being sold. Well, they put a lot of pressure on the rest of the family, and they want the money out of it. They want to buy a house. They want to send their kids to college, whatever. But that sacrifices these old vineyards to the developers, and that's a shame that happens. But that's just human nature, I guess. That people come along, they're not interested in the grapes. They're not interested in the history of them. They're not interested in making wine. They're very interested in selling off that property and getting their piece of the action. Yeah, I see it unfortunately continuing, and I don't think there's any way to stop it.
You want to tell me a little bit about yourself, what you do, maybe a website, how people could contact you if they want any grapes from Oakley area, Brentwood?
My website is calwinebroker.com, CALWINEBROKER.com, and I go to that. You'll get on my email list. I have close to 1,000 people on my email list. These are people who buy grapes from me during the grape season. And I'll announce when and where we're going to be picking grapes, and you can show up and we'll go out and you can pick your grapes and take the grapes home and make wine. So if you go to my website, I go into a lot of detail of exactly how it all works prior to you when you come out to pick grapes. So if you go there and read my website and get on my email list, you can get grapes and make your wine. So I sell to home winemakers. I also sell to a number of boutique wineries, and occasionally I sell to much bigger wineries. Anybody who wants grapes, let me know.
During my interview with Michael, he sent me a document with some more facts and dates on Contra Costa wine growing. I'd like to thank Ron Peck for making the document. I'll run through a little bit of it. I received all of this the day after the episode was published, so this and Michael's interview are a bit of an addendum to the episode, but I wanted to add them because I think they give some more context to the story. In 1856, Contra Costa County had about 110 acres of wine grapes. Almost 20 years later, in 1874, we see that jump to about 764. This continues to climb, and another 20 years later, in 1894, there are almost 5,000 acres planted. This tops out at 8,895 acres in 1916, and by 1920, it had shrunk to 3,100, with Prohibition taking its toll. John Marsh, who we met earlier, planted the first vineyard and made the first wine in the area in 1846 and 1850, respectively. He planted a small vineyard on his ranch in Brentwood with Mission, Isabella, and Catawba grapes. Another grower, Peter Crenna, had a 60-acre vineyard in Concord. In 1897, he built the Concord Winery. In 1889, Frank Lukes had a 25,000-gallon annual production winery in the Pleasant Hill, Pacheco area. Walnut Creek was also heavily invested in viticulture, and wine grapes amounted for about a third of the agricultural land in the area in 1900. They even had a grape festival every year from 1911 to 1936, when it changed to the Walnut Festival. The California Wine Association even had 500 acres of vineyards in the area, and at one point the CWA controlled about 80% of the wine trade in the U.S. As we move over to Martinez, we see John Strentzel, who was also John Muir's father-in-law, planting a 20-acre vineyard amongst his 2,600 acres of fruit. The Christian brothers were also active in the area, producing wine and brandy on their 70-acre property starting in 1879, before they moved to Napa in 1931. The Vine Hill area of Martinez had over 100 acres of grapes between Charles Merrill and Fabian Just. Thanks for listening to this small addendum to the episode. Thanks for listening today to episode 11. Hopefully the new Contra Costa AVA goes through and gets approval. I can't help think that it will be a good thing for the area. If you haven't tried wines from Contra Costa, now's the time. In the reds, I tend to find a lot of lifted aromatics, red fruit, usually a bright acidity, some pretty fine tannins, along with a bit of dusty earth. Some of these vineyards can have a little bit of a eucalyptus influence too if the trees are being used as a windbreak. The whites seem to retain their acid well, becoming medium-bodied with a great texture. I want to thank Becky and Patrick for giving me some more info and details about the area and the proposal, and also wanted to give a special thanks to Karina Gould and Sharon Marcos of the Sigorete Land Trust for helping me with the Native American history of the area. And of course, I'd also like to thank Michael Parker, Cal Winebroker, for providing me with a lot of kind of bonus information for everyone. I've purchased grapes from some of the vineyards that Michael works with many a times, and if you're a home winemaker in the area, it's a great resource to get some grapes from Contra Costa County. I also want to give a special thanks to Drew Goyen from the Wine Berserkers for always keeping everyone supplied with information that is going on in Contra Costa County, keeping interest alive for these vineyards, some of which might not get the recognition they deserve. You can follow the podcast at Indie Wine Podcast on Instagram or email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com for feedback, questions, or comments. I'd really appreciate you telling your wine friends about the podcast if you're enjoying it. There are links in the show description to many of the organizations and people mentioned in the episode today. We'll be back soon with a new episode focusing on the McCullumney Glen Vineyard in Lodi. Thanks. Have a good one. It's windy. It is windy.